So without further ado, I don't want to take up any more of his time. Please give a rousing welcome to our friend, Mark Ludwig.
All right, I do want to congratulate everybody on being here. I know it's not always the most convenient thing to do, but as I look around the room, like I said, I'm very, very encouraged for the state of Oregon by the fact that you guys all showed up here. I know we did have a few people travel. I know we've got, somebody was here from Alaska, I think, did somebody say? So we've got Alaska in the room. We've got Washington in the room. Two from Washington. Okay, by the way, we do have, Kevin Reynolds from the Washington Fathers' Rights Movement, and Colleen from the Oregon Fathers' Rights Movement is here. So if you guys get a chance to meet them afterwards too, we appreciate you guys being there. Any other state, well, before I introduce, there's one in particular that I'm going to introduce in a second here, but besides anybody who came with you, any other states? Okay, we do have one guy that, this guy is just, how far is it?
California from Oregon, like 13 hours, 16 hours?
Yeah, a
17-hour drive.
Yeah, a 17-hour drive so far to get here tonight, and then he's going to drive over to Boise tomorrow to catch my event in Boise on Wednesday. So I think get up here. I want everybody to see you guys. I want Facebook Live people to see you. Yeah, Facebook Live people. This is commitment, guys. That is the real hero of the community.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
I'm proud of you. That is darn impressive. So yeah, I'm taking the easy way. I'm flying over. Most of you know I had some meetings set up with legislators over in Boise, Idaho, and I'm just, from an efficient time standpoint, I hate to just fly and just do one city. And I thought, well, Portland's pretty close, Seattle's pretty close, Salt Lake City's all real close. Originally I was going to rent a car just to drive to one or two other cities. And then I remembered hearing stories of some of these Idaho snowstorms, and I thought, well, just in case I get bogged down, so I found a cheap airfare to get from here to Idaho tomorrow night. But I'm just darn impressed, Anthony, to be able to drive that far. It's impressive. I do want to, once again, thank, and I always leave people out, but the three that I've been dealing with the most is Ayla, Jason, and Seth. And guys, I'll tell you what, most of you know, I deal with legislation in 29 different states, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of leaders across the country, and I'm not exaggerating. They didn't pay me to say this. You've got some of the best leaders in the entire country right here. You really do. So I think they all deserve a round of applause. Yeah, very grateful for the bill that they did last year, 318. It was a similar strategy to what we did in Missouri in 2016. Some people think, well, it's facts, findings, conclusions. That doesn't do anything. Guys, it stops the ship and it turns the direction of the ship. And when the ship's going 90 miles an hour the wrong direction, you got to stop it and you got to turn it around. And that was a critical decision that they made to go with that bill, and I think it was just a genius move. So I applaud them on that move. Just frustrating, these two-year states, very frustrating. It's very hard, especially in the off years. It's almost impossible. We did submit a bill in Indiana this year in the off year, but it's very hard to submit a new bill in an off year for any of these states. But I'm convinced 2021, you guys are going to be one of the talks of the entire country. I'll be willing to come back up here and do anything I can to help out. But the most important person to thank is all of you for showing up. I mean, you guys are the ones. If you've ever been to a state capitol, you mention the words, I'm a constituent of yours, and I'll tell you what, every legislator perks up. That is exactly what they want to hear. They don't want to hear from one or two people. They want to hear from masses. And I know so many times people think, well, gosh, you've been around the legislative arena for 30 years. Guys, everybody in this room calling your legislator can do so much more than I could do at your state capitol. So we need every one of you. Sometimes I go through and I talk about how to dress when you're dealing with legislators. Understand, that's when you're going on a regular basis. When you're basically representing the issue for a larger community. When you're talking to your representative, I want you to dress basically the way you normally dress. Dress up just a slight little bit more, but not much more. They need to feel that, hey, you're their constituent coming in. You're not dressing to impress. Now, if you're meeting with 4 or 5 legislators, that's a different thing. But when you're meeting with your own state rep or your own state senator, don't think that you have to be trained or anything. You just need to tell your story. Well, I say tell your story. If you've watched my Facebook Live, you got 45 seconds to tell your story. Unfortunately, you don't realize it, but you're coming across as bitter and anger if you give a 30-minute dissertation of an organ recital when you're meeting with them. You've got to bullet point it and talk about how that relates to the bill and the piece of legislation that you want to work on. But they want to hear a 45-second condensed version, and then the biggest key they want to hear is how it's an epidemic. If you make it sound like yours, every once in a while, not every once in a while, every night I get calls. Eric Carroll and I were talking about this the other day in Atlanta. That I probably get at least 5 or 10 messages a day, every single day, from people that say, I've got a story that you've never heard before. Trust me, I've heard thousands of stories that everybody supposedly never heard before, and as soon as you started, I can finish the story for you. And unfortunately, if you go to your legislator and make them think that your story is too odd, you don't need to change a law if there's only one incident. You need to change a law if there's an epidemic across an entire state. So what you need to do is condense your story to 45 seconds and immediately pivot and say, however, I can tell you this. My story isn't uncommon. There are, bless you. Not you, the person in front of you. No. But, you need to pivot then and say, hey, but my story isn't that uncommon. There are hundreds and thousands of these stories across the state of Oregon, and that's why we need legislation passed. But I do want to applaud, like I said, every single one of you for being here and realize you guys are the ones that are going to be making the change. Now, unfortunately, it's taken us 40 years to get in the situation we're in, and billions of dollars. So it's not going to change overnight. Every once in a while I get people that are frustrated. They're like, oh, gosh, you've been doing this for a couple of years, and we haven't changed all of the 50 states yet. Guys, first off, this isn't a priority issue for most legislators, just because they don't understand it. Think of it. Until it happened to you, how familiar were you with this issue? Until it happened to me, I didn't think anything was wrong with being an every other weekend dad. It just had never come on my radar screen. I never thought about it. And all of a sudden, when it happens to you, and more importantly, when it's your kid, because I can take the pain, but I don't want my son going out without those memories. I don't want my son missing out on the responsibility, the teachings of having a dad teach him those things. And that's when it really cuts down, when all of a sudden it's your family member that's affected. Realize, for the majority of legislators, they're not against us. They just aren't aware yet. It hasn't hit home. And most legislators, when people run for office, they decide to run for office because there's a passion that they have. Whether it's a Second Amendment issue or a pro-life issue or whatever the issue is. And for the majority of legislators across the country, shared parenting isn't in their top 25. That's not that they're bad people. It's our mission to educate them to get it raised up to that level. Now, how we go about that is very important. Unfortunately, the issue has been portrayed by the opposition as an angry dad issue and as a father's issue. So, and that's no condemnation on the father's rights movement, by the way. I want to make sure I clarify that. The father's rights movement is a great organization because for most people, let's face it, 5 or 6 out of every cases, or 5 to 6 to 1, it affects men more than women. So when men are affected, if they're going to type into a search engine, they're going to type in fathers. So we get some people, they say, well, we shouldn't have a father's rights movement. We shouldn't make this about... There's a big difference between verbiage you use when talking to a legislator and verbiage we need to use on social media to open the funnel so people can find us. Eric Carroll was dealing with it. Some of you know I just filmed a TV episode for him in Atlanta for his Dad Talk show. And people were saying, well, you shouldn't have a show called Dad Talk. Oh my gosh, yes you should. That's going to be one of the best things that we can do for the entire country. And same thing with Father's Rights Movement. We need to be able to use that word to open the funnel so when someone's affected, they can type into a search engine and get a connection right away. Now, the distinction is when you're talking to legislators, usually I don't like to talk about fathers, and I don't like to talk about mothers, because it's not about either of us. As Seth said, it's about the kids. It's not about us. I can take the pain. It's the kids that we want to be fighting for. So it's very critical to use that verbiage. Unfortunately, the opposition has done a great job of framing the narrative of an angry dad. Because in the past, there were people who got affected, and as most of you know, when it first happens to you, you go through, I don't know all the stages of of anger and bitterness, and I don't know if we have any PhD psychologists here that probably know all those stages, but a lot of us get trapped in that anger stage, and we're stuck there a little long, and unfortunately, that's when people want to do something. So what they do, they go to a capitol or a courthouse and they protest. And unfortunately, that feeds right into the angry dad narrative. especially if you get multiple people. People always are trying to get me to come along with protest, and they get mad at me because I won't join into protests. Mark, will you come speak at this protest? I'm like, no, I won't do that. You're feeding in, and they're like, but I won't be one of those angry dads. And my attitude is, you won't be. But you get 4 or 5 people together that have all been affected by the same thing, your energy is going to get charged up. It's like going to a sporting event. You know, we had the St. Louis Blues just won the Stanley Cup last year. I like throwing that in there wherever I go. But, you know, I just don't see too many people go to a hockey game and go, oh, they scored a goal. Good job. Yay. No, man, they're riled up, and they've been drinking. You know, everybody's just like cranked up. Everybody's wearing Blues jerseys. They got their faces painted. They're screaming. They're yelling. That's what ends up happening. You get 4 or 5 people together that have all lost their kids. They're missing things. They're charged up. We want change, and we want it now. And I'll tell you what, the media is no longer into journalism. I think everybody realizes that. When I was growing up, the TV and the news was into journalism, and they would report the news. Nowadays, with cable options, when I was growing up, you had 3 choices: ABC, CBS, and NBC. Nowadays, the competition is into the thousands of news sources. So you're in the competition with so many news sources. If you just report the news, nobody's going to watch you. So what you have to do is create some news. You've got to make your news more entertaining, especially on TV. TV is where they're really trying to fight. And so what happens is they need a hook before they go to commercial break, so you don't change to another channel. You talk about a hook, go to a protest at a courthouse. Find the wackiest. You could have 100 people that are all great, very professional, very, present themselves very well, and one wackadoo out there, and I promise you this, that's who they're filming. And before the commercial break, they don't show the other people. They'll say, and coming up after commercial break, you're not going to believe this person thinks they deserve to be a dad. And all of a sudden, what we thought was a positive gets used against us, and we just lost 3 years of progress. So, unfortunately, they've done a great job of that. Now, we've changed that quite a bit, but we still have a long, long, long way to go. There's capitals, I'll just tell you, in Texas, I think some of you know, we got some great leaders down in Texas. Unfortunately, it only took a handful to kill that bill a couple years ago that did things like that, where legislators were threatened, and they finally ended up pulling the bill. I still think it was kind of a cop-out, but nonetheless, there's no need to give them an excuse to pull a bill. And we had the same challenge up in Michigan. So a couple things we need to do is, number one, get more eloquent in how we describe what's going on to a legislator. A couple of good things that I like to describe. Number one, I do like to give some of the emotional things. I like to talk about the fact that, every time I drive in rush hour, in the morning and I see the kids at the school bus, I don't get to see my kid. I don't know if my kid's at the school bus that day or not. Now, for my kid, his mom drives him to school every day, but I don't know, did he make it to school or not? For several times, I found out that my son had missed a day of school, that he'd been sick, and I wasn't aware. Now, it may not happen, but what if there was a tragedy? Anybody ever remember, if you're old enough, 9/11? I didn't have Levi at that point, but I can promise you, every parent, first thing they thought is, where's my kids? If there's ever a tragedy in St. Louis, I want to know where my son is. And so to be able to bring things like that up, to talk to legislators about the fact that, when they were growing up as a child, if they had both a mother and a father, they looked forward to different experiences with each of them. When I was growing up, I looked forward. My dad had a 71 VW with a hole in the floorboard, and every time it rained, the water would come up on the passenger side. But I can still remember, my dad was a chemical engineer at Monsanto, and at 5:25, that VW would come up Marvale Lane. And I remember it was like music to my ears. It was my dad time. And at 5:25, I was waiting for my dad to come up the street because I knew we were going to be able to play ball or something. My dad always did something before dinner time. We had father-son time. And I would play catch with my dad. I played baseball. I was horrible, but I played catch with my dad every single night. My son didn't get to do that after school. My son doesn't get the experiences of his dad helping him with homework, of his dad getting ready in the morning, of his dad packing his lunch. I get weekends, and I'm very fortunate because I know some of you don't even get that. And so I feel very guilty sometimes telling about the time I get to spend with Levi, because I know a lot of you have it worse than I do. I get basically no week time, but I do get at weekends. The challenge is I've become the Disney dad. My son doesn't get to see that fathers have responsibility. He doesn't get to see that dad has work to do during the week. He doesn't get to see those routine things that are an important part of the bonding parenting process for a child. So explain a few of those things to legislators. Talk about some of the fatherless statistics that affects mothers too, but we have the numbers showing that high school dropout rates, incarceration rates, violent crime rates, all of those, 70 to 94% are tied to growing up without a father. Because the child has two traumas that they're dealing with. Trauma number one is mom and dad aren't together. They don't know why. They know they love them both, but they can sense conflict. But if they're really young, they don't know how to verbalize that they're confused about that. So it stays internalized. Now they have the second trauma. The second trauma is one of the parents is kind of subservient to the first parent, and they don't understand why that is. Why does one parent have to ask permission to be able to vary from the schedule? Why is it that if I want to play baseball, this parent can't give me approval because they only see me on weekends? If I want to go to baseball practice, I have to get approval from this parent instead. And they're very confused, and that's what leads to all the problems.